So I wanted to ask about Iran, obviously, as the world is looking at shock and horror of what's happening, and I often think about U.S. General Wesley Clark. He made this comment regarding what happened after the September 11 attack, arguing that they had a plan to take out 7 countries. They were going to take out Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and of course the grand finale was Iran. And even Bush, thereafter put Iran on this axis of evil. And eh, why is this so important to the Americans? Because this is a very different target than they had over the past 30 years. All the US presidents, it seemed more or less wanted to go after Iran. They all shared the same rhetoric of Trump, but they knew that it would be too much, too big, to try to take. But still, Trump went all the way. What do you see as being the strategic significance here, besides liberating girls and all this, helping protesters, this nonsense?
No, Glenn, this is way more complicated. Iran is the Holy Grail. Well, I am one of the last old school foreign correspondents on the planet. I was in Afghanistan before, during, and after, including 9/11, and I was in Iraq before, during, and after. And I was going to Iran during the 2000s many times, including at the time when Rumsfeld, the Cheney regime, was talking about bomb, 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 bomb Iran. That was John McCain's refrain every week, in fact. So we all knew Iran was the big prize. It always was, according to the Project for the New American Century, according to Clean Break, according to the Zionist influence in DC already in the 90s everywhere. So, of course, they couldn't do it before. And what the famous Wesley Clark quote, in fact, they got everybody. And of course, the only missing piece was Iran. So this war was planned. We can say that this war was planned since the late 90s, in fact, not only the past 20 years or 25 years, even more than that, the previous millennium. And of course, now they found the perfect messenger. What some of my Chinese friends, scholars call the baboon in the White House. I love it. The barbarian baboon in the White House, totally controlled by Zionists, totally controlled not only by Netanyahu, but the circle around Netanyahu, the International Zionist Alliance, which especially financial, and of course his inner circle, the people who he actually listens to. There are not many. They're making a lot of money out of this war. And that includes everybody, starting with the ghastly Jared Kushner. This should be an investigation in itself, but obviously, because there's no more investigative journalism in the US, only you see this only in fringe Substack accounts, for instance. But how Kushner is profiting, even starting when he left the White House after Trump 1.0, when he got the first $2 billion for his affinity partners from MBS directly. Basically, MBS wrote a check for Kushner. And now the price is even high, it's $5 billion. He's getting $5 billion from the Saudis for pushing, of course, the father of Ivanka, let's put it this way. And the real brains in that couple is not Jared Kushner, it's actually Ivanka. He is an absolutely ghastly, low-life, cheap real estate entrepreneur. But of course, Trump's listened to him. That's very, very dangerous. So he was the main seller of this war, face to face to Trump or ear to ear to Trump. And everybody is profiting. Lutnick, Chris Wright, Secretary of Energy, all these, it's absolutely this, all these people, Besant, all of them. So for them is also a free ride financially. The big picture, of course, is Eretz Israel, Greater Israel. And that, according to them, is advancing fast if they can eliminate the only regional superpower, which is Iran, and the only competitor to Israel to be the number one power all across West Asia. So there was never any planning about that. And they thought it would be a decapitation strike and the whole thing would be over the weekend. And on Monday, we would have mission accomplished, the Wall Street, going through the roof and all that. So that was the planning. When things started to be derailed half an hour after the decapitation strike on February 28th against Ayatollah Khamenei and a great deal of the leadership, they had no plan B. And they still don't. And what just happened a few minutes before we start talking, which is something absolutely extraordinary, when we were all expecting the beginning of the real highway to hell of bombing the electricity grid of Iran, there was Taco. Trump always chickens out all over again. And why? Because he looked at the numbers, he looked at the markets, he looked at gold, he looked at the bond market, and obviously panic set in. So he had to back off. And by some time, for the moment it's 5 days, we don't know how this is going to play. But the most interesting thing is that a few minutes later, the Iranians went online and basically told the whole planet that the president of the United States is a liar. There are no conversations going on at the moment. And this is something that we hear from Arakshi, foreign minister, from Kalibaf, the head of the parliament, from other political sources across Iran. He made that up. And the main reason, and this is something when you talk to financial analysts, they tell you, the main reason is the bond market. When Trump saw that the bond market was going totally out of control, like, the yields for 10-year treasuries is getting to 5%, actually went to over 5%, came back to 4.5, and now I think it's 4.4 or something, and it may go up again. The United States simply cannot survive with the bond yields so high. Simple as that. And they cannot finance anything. It collapses financially. You have like mortgage rates in the US going to 7% or 8%. This is suicidal. So much more than the oil market, the threat to the oil market by the Strait of Hormuz being closed but not closed, which is fantastic. In fact, it's not closed. There is a toll booth. You have to pay the toll to get in. If you pay the toll, no problem. You navigate in Iranian territorial waters. And first of all, your cargo must have been settled in Petro-Yuan. These are the three imperatives. If you follow these three, no problem. You can cross. Anybody can cross, including the Japanese, which are saying, should I stay or should I go? But the most important thing, much more important than oil, is the bond market. So it's all about follow the money. It's all about money. And obviously, the people who are making money out of this war inside the US, they are absolutely terrified because it's getting out of control. So that would be the number one rationale for some sort of deal. But Glenn, we know that a deal is impossible when you look at the list of demands on the Iranian side and the list of demands on the American side. It's absolutely impossible to find a common ground. And that's why it's still so dangerous. So, the infernal machine, which is an escalation machine for the past 3 weeks, which today we thought would be okay, and now it goes totally out of control. It's just postponed for the next 5 days. But the escalation machine is still there. And there's no way out. And there's no off-ramp for Trump. If he chooses an off-ramp, that is, in practice, the end of the American empire. And even people with an IQ of 10 can understand that in the US. And at the same time, he cannot fulfill the demands by the Iranians, and some of them are really, really hardcore. No more US bases in West Asia anywhere. payment of reparations. Some figures are floating around are $500 billion. And of course, we continue with our nuclear program, our missile program, the way we want. All of those are, from the point of view of the US, are, out of the question. So it's still a cliffhanger. The cliffhanger was supposed to be today. Now we have to wait for another 5 days.
Well, I'm glad, the horror show was postponed a bit, but it is interesting that, well, as you framed it, that what the Iranians are after essentially is the capitulation of the US in that region. But what the
Yes.
US is asking of Iran is their capitulation. That is, give up its regional allies, its ballistic missiles, its conventional deterrence, keep components of its economy. So, given that this is the case, the only way this can be achieved is through victory. And so we seem to be locked in this war of attrition where the goal is to exhaust the other side. Now, Trump says that he has, unlimited weapons, which of course is nonsense. Otherwise, they would be pulling their missile defense out of Asia. It doesn't make any sense. But we have a general, somewhat idea of what the United States has, and also its ability to produce new weapons. But Iran's weapon, we know a lot less. That is, the Iranians say they have a lot of weapons stored into their tunnels, the tens of thousands. Again, but it's very difficult to get this verified. Not just the quantity, but also the quality. So, what is it that we actually know about the weapons of Iran, especially the quality? The quantity is a bit more difficult, I guess.
The quality has been already proven by the way they employ some of their best missiles, like the Khorramshahr 4 and the Fatah 2. They only started to use them only in the past year, let's say during the past week. And very parsimonious, not yet in huge quantities. And we don't know, nobody knows what is in store in the underground missile cities, which are in the eastern part of Iran. In the southeast, Sistan Baluchistan province, in the far east near the Afghan border, and none of these areas has been touched by the Americans so far. The Americans don't even know where these underground cities are. So every time that they have, let's say, a technological leap on the kind of missiles that they are using, it's always very, very impressive. And now that there's no protective shield over Israel, for all practical purposes, David Sling, Arrow 3, TED, most of it is all gone. They can bomb Israel the way they wanted. And this is part of their new strategy. They keep tweaking their decentralized mosaic strategy, I would say, week after week. And now they are saying openly, now we have an offensive strategy. So far was defensive, and now it's offensive. Why? Because they know that they have exhausted the response capacity of American and Israeli air defense. So now they can choose their targets precisely. And for instance, when they didn't attack the Dimona nuclear reactor, they attacked a building around 10 kilometers away from Dimona, housing scientists. So this was a message. Basically, they're saying, look, we can bomb Dimona anytime we want it, but we won't do it now. If you bomb Natanz, we're going to bomb Dimona. That's part of the message as well. And the Israelis bombed the vicinity of Natanz already, and the Russians were absolutely furious about it. There are still a lot of Russian technicians over there. So the Iranians, their deterrence is incremental, and they always come up with new weapons that we never saw being employed in the battlefield. So we can say that they have not. It's true, they have not shown everything they have for obvious reasons, because they are planning for a long war. And when they say that we can last until for the next 6 months, yes, they can. First of all, because we don't know where most of these missiles and drones are. Second, every week they come up with new weapons that we never seen before. Third, we have not even seen what they have to actually defend the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, assuming the Americans get nearby, let's put it this way. So that's what this is what deterrence means. And this is how you have a decentralized mosaic strategy that it can be fine-tuned on purpose, progressively, methodically, meticulously, and it is extremely impressive. And on the other side, we see what? The only thing that they do, bomb indiscriminately, bomb civilian targets, bomb residential neighborhoods in Tehran. But that's the logic of, in fact, a terror, the syndrome of the terror regimes intertwined. These are two terror regimes that are walking side by side and bombing side by side with no regard to civilian lives. They never had. And the Iranians still, because everything we can talk about Shiite theology and their ethics of resistance and their respect for human life, they are not attacking civilian targets. They are starting to attack civilian dual-use infrastructure in Israel. That's another story. Because now they want to concentrate on basically smashing all the key nodes that make the state of Israel function. That's what they call the Great Constriction. That's their own terminology for it. And this has started in this past 3 or 4 days. And it will continue this week a lot. And you can count that they will continue to bomb Haifa refineries, military installations. Military installations are next to Ben Gurion Airport. There's no question about that. So obviously the Israelis can, even while the enormous censorship in Israel, they cannot admit that. But now that some images are floating around everywhere, anybody can see that they are being hammered again, just like during the 12-day war. But because for them, they simply cannot pick up the phone and call Trump again and say, get us a ceasefire. First of all, because nobody wants a ceasefire as it stands. It's the logic of escalation on both sides, on 3 sides, if we count Israel as one side. They will continue to get hammered.
Well, I also picked up on the Iranians making this argument that they are shifting from defense to offense, and I expected something similar after the U.S. had and Israel had spent a lot of its munition and its air defenses for the Iranians to escalate. But what do we know yet about Iran's strategy in the war? Not the ambitions, but also how they expect to achieve this. Because as you mentioned, the wish list of the Iranians in terms of a post-war settlement, it's quite high. I can't see the Americans agreeing to essentially any of it. But how do you see them moving forward with this? What are they? Yeah.
The number one demand is, of course, no more U.S. military bases all across West Asia. Well, they are already on it because from 70 to 80% of these bases are already completely destroyed. And with only 3 weeks of war. If we have 3 more weeks, they will destroy all of them, period. And yesterday, something beyond extraordinary happened, which nobody's talking about it, but the significance is stratospheric. 23 years after shock and awe in Iraq, the United States and NATO have been expelled from Iraq, period. They are not there anymore. That's it. It's over. They only have a base in Erbil, but it doesn't count. Iraqi Kurdistan is basically a bunch of gangsters. It doesn't count. It's not even in Baghdad, they look at the Kurdistan, those gangsters. But Iraq itself, there's no more US and NATO troops. It took 23 years. And because in the end, they had to do a ceasefire because they were being bombed relentlessly by the different strands of the Iraqi resistance, Hashd al-Shabi, Kataib Hezbollah, and many other different groups and militias. So it's possible, long term, relentless, and clarity of vision, spiritual strength. You can put it. There's many declinations of how resistance works, and in the case of Iran, they have been preparing for this war not for 47 years. They have been preparing for this war since 2005, 2006. Let's put it this way, 20 years. You remember in the mid 2000s when there were active plans to really bomb Iran, coordinated by Rumsfeld at the time. But the Americans were thinking that we don't have enough, because at the time they were thinking in terms of also a ground invasion. Everything that was gained in Washington was a total disaster, so they abandoned it. So they said, no, we need to undermine the regime, the mullahs, all that crap that they talk about all the time, for a few more years. And then when the time is right, which the way they see it, it's now. So it's not only hardcore Zionists, but old school neocons, the people from the project of the New American Century, the remnants of the project of the New American Century. Now is the right time, after they try to undermine it through the so-called protests, which there were legitimate protests, but they were weaponized by foreign forces. The time is now. And they are in for a very rude awakening. Because especially after the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, very few people in Washington know that Moshtaba was, for years, for at least 15, 16 years, he was working very, very close with the IRGC leadership. So when we were together in Iran last year. At that time, I was asking practically everybody that I could, what was the relationship between Moshtaba and IRGC? And everybody said, yes, it's very close. He's the kind of bridge between his dad, which has so many dossiers to take care of, and the IRGC. He knows exactly how the IRGC works. He's totally respected by the IRGC. And I remember that in May last year, they were telling me, yes, he's one of the top candidates to be the next supreme leader. There were three others, but he was very well positioned, especially because of relationship with the IRGC. So the fact that he was elected by the Council of Experts to be the new supreme leader, even if he's not a top Ayatollah, they are betting on the idea, on the symbology, on the fact that he is continuing the work of his father. And this is so powerful that even if he doesn't appear in public, his aura and his reach is tremendous. And he's universally respected from day one. So that in itself is extraordinary. He doesn't need to come out, give fantastic speeches. No, that's not the point. So this implies a continuity of government, a continuity of an idea of resistance, with the difference that now the people who are completely in charge now are the IRGC. There's no question about that. They are running Iran at the moment. So obviously, there's the survival of the Iranian state is their survival. It's inexorably linked. So they're going all the way. And of course, you should never forget, they have the Shiite spirit of martyrdom fully incarnated. If they are martyred, they are dying for the cause. So you cannot break people like that. It's out of the question. Especially when on the other side, you see people who can barely read, they can barely string two sentences together, not to mention read a book by Kant, written by Ali Larijani, also assassinated. So the imbalance between the spirit of barbaria on one side and the spirit of Persian culture on the other is brutal. And they learned something that they didn't know before, the art of PR. Their PR is working very, very well all across the global south. Now they became hits in terms of public opinion. Support for Iran all across the global south is practically unanimous now. They're making those little funny videos with Lego characters and all that works a miracle in terms of PR, showing that they have a little bit of leeway. You have one of their spokesmen saying, Donald Trump, you're fired.
Yeah, I saw that.
Was absolutely brilliant. They turned the whole thing upside down. So this, with young people in the US, across the West, in China, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, wow, this is absolutely priceless. So the Epstein syndicate, they already lost the battle for public opinion on a global level, that's for sure. And married to the Iranians who learn how to play the soft power game as well. So when you put this all together, they have military cards, soft power cards, and pressure cards on their hands that nobody thought that they would have 3-4 weeks ago. Nobody would bet that they would resist. First of all, that they would resist so long and counterpunch fiercely like they're doing. Of course, once again, they were underestimated. And that's one of the traits of empire. The empire underestimates everybody. Everybody is, by definition, inferior. Not to mention that death cult in Tel Aviv. The whole planet, for them, the whole planet is inferior. So it's part of my personal thesis that Iran is fighting for the whole global south in this war. It's much more than a war against 3 BRICS. And we could talk a lot about the implosion of BRICS at the moment. BRICS now is in a coma. Pains me to say that. I dedicated a lot of work this past few years just to follow BRICS. And at the moment, it's in deep coma. And we don't know if it's going to be resurrected. But basically, this is a war. Iran is leading this war with the backup of Russia and China. And yes, it's 3 BRICS trying to defend the whole global south from a cancer, essentially.
Well, I also found it fascinating, the image of Iran. If you would have gone back 20 years, it would have been unthinkable to have this kind of sympathies for Iran around the world. Of course, 2 surprise attacks and this kind of savage destruction of Iran, it tends to whip up sympathies. But of course, I think it's more to it. But what you said about continuity, I think that's also a very good point, because this is a problem when you demonize your opponent to assume that they're all weak, just one evil leader holding the whole house of cards together. The continuity, I think, was underestimated. I've seen politicians and journalists make the argument after Khamenei was killed that, oh, well, now the Iranians finally have an opportunity for peace and, freedom. So, first of all, I'm not sure he took away that. I don't even know where to begin. It's very strange. They thought, you kill this one guy and now tomorrow it's a new country. I mean, it was I don't understand it. I usually, think it's ignorance or malice, but I think I underestimate ignorance at times, what they actually thought would happen after killing Khamenei. But regarding BRICS, though, I thought this was an interesting point, because this is, given that it's a war of attrition, it's largely a war of all or nothing. That is, the U.S. hopes, of course, if it can knock out the Iranian government, and they can, maybe replace it with a pro-U.S. government. Otherwise, just destroy Iran, balkanize it, whatever it would be. This would also then weaken Russia, China. On the other hand, if the United States fails, you're going to see a much more strengthened Iran locked in closer with Russia and China. So essentially, this greater Eurasian project will be much more powerful than it was before. But why is it then that you see BRICS being in a coma, and also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? What do you see? Iran is now a member of both. How do you see the future of them?
Well, they didn't say anything. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they released a statement, a pitiful statement for that matter, when we see one of their full members being directly attacked. BRICS is even worse because this is something, of course, that we had been discussing for years. The internal problems of BRICS. This is something that we discussed with the Russians a lot. And the Russians are always the agglutinators inside BRICS. Now, they are always bridging differences. But how can you bridge differences now when you have the UAE prodding directly the Epstein syndicate to go all out against Iran, full member of BRICS? When you have what India did to Iran, like a series of betrayals, everything, including the absolutely ghastly episode with the ship that was invited for that show, and when he left Indian territorial water, was torpedoed by the Americans. And nobody knows for sure. It's still being endlessly debated if the Indians passed the coordinates to the Americans or not. There's a huge debate about that, including a lot of very well-informed and prepared people in India. And some of these analysts and scholars in India, they are absolutely appalled, embarrassed. And they said, look, we have no words to express to our friends all across the global south how Indian foreign policy is betraying Indian values. We are not that thing in government right now, but there's not much they can do. So the internal splits of BRICS are terrible. Brazil is a joke. I prefer not even to talk about it. And South Africa is irrelevant. So, we still depend on Russia and China. For the moment, two different strategies, but very effective. We all know how Russia and China are defending Iran diplomatically, including in the UN Security Council. There was a phone call between Lavrov and Arakchi yesterday. Very, very important. What was leaked from that phone call was the usual blah, blah, blah. But I'm sure they talked about very, very important bilateral issues, including this backup short and long term. And China is also helping Iran diplomatically and, of course, with intel, both Russia and China. I wrote about this in some of my previous columns in detail, how Russia and China are helping Iran in terms of 24/7 intel, satellite intel. In the case of Russia, even better, those Shaheeds which went to Russia, transformed into Geranians, and then went back to Iran, and now they are in the battlefield, much enhanced compared to the original Shaheeds. Not to mention the famous Astrakhan-Tehran shuttle, where we have no idea what was inside those Ilyushin cargo planes coming from Russia to Iran in terms of hardware and software as well. So they got Iran's back. There's no question about that. But they are looking at the bigger picture long term. And they know that the only way to constitute the project that all of us independent analysts, yourself included, have been talking about and writing about for many, many years, Eurasia integration, depends on these three actors, players, which happen to be BRICS and SCO, the three of them. Russia, China, and Iran. So they cannot possibly allow Iran to fail or to be dismembered or to be decomposed or to be blown up. So that's the number one thing. So this is what guides their strategic considerations in Moscow and in Beijing. On the nitty-gritty, on a day-to-day basis, It's fascinating because, for instance, the Russians say, look, the Iranians are not asking for anything, as they did not ask in the past, in the recent past. If they do, we'll be there. And of course, the Persians, as we all know, they're very, very proud. They would only ask if they are really against the wall, and they are not at the moment. They are controlling the narrative. They have practically all the cards in their hands, apart from indiscriminate bombing. All the other important cards, the Iranians have it. And the Chinese, of course, they are looking at a strategic partner, one of their sources of energy, one of the key nodes of the Belt and Road, the New Silk Roads. And of course, they do it the Chinese way in ways that none of us see, but it's there, you know. So this will be the future of the multipolar Eurasia integration world, depending on these three actors. And at the moment, we can say that BRICS is a non-entity. Completely. I hope it changes. I hope the Russians could tell the Indians a few things in a run-up towards the BRICS summit in Delhi later this year. That's a horrible year to have India as share of BRICS this year because there's no trust on India from many of the BRICS nations. But it's going to be hard to come up from the dead. It's going to be very, very hard, very different. I assume you have the same point of view. So let me ask you, Glenn. Do you agree with this mini analysis at the moment, or are you more auspicious, or is it realistic?
Well, I was also, yeah, a bit shocked by the behavior of the Indians. That is the way they invited Iran to participate, and then in this naval exercise, and then see the Americans destroy the Iranian warship on its way home, and then not even being able to condemn it in any way. I thought this is quite shocking. But then on the other hand, you see now Iran giving access to India to pass, in the Strait of Hormuz. So it's I'm not sure if some of these things are able to be fixed. Also, the international north-south transportation corridor, the one running from Russia, Iran to India. At some point, this is just in the strategic interest of India to preserve. So if they don't develop this with the Iranians, then they're not going to be able to connect properly with the Russians, which means that the Russians would then be leaning even more into China. And I think it's the Indians' ambitions or interest to create a more of a balance of dependence in Eurasia, to make sure there's many centers of power that China doesn't become too heavy. And the only way you can do that is to diversify. So you need Iran. If you don't have Iran, Eurasia will be very, very China-centric. And this is why it's not in India's interest. It's not in US interest. So I don't understand this obsession with trying to disconnect this corridor. It seems very foolish. But yeah, my last question for you was about Azerbaijan, though, because I spoke to a common friend of ours, Professor Marandi, and he was making the point that it's very likely that at some point in this war, Azerbaijan will be pulled in, given that it's in the past at least been more than indirectly involved in the attacks on Iran. How do you see this? Do you see Azerbaijan being pulled in, but also what will be the wider consequences? Because if you look at the energy architecture of Eurasia, Azerbaijan has this little energy corridor between Iran and Russia. This is essentially what the Europeans look to for diversification. Even now, they don't have Iran, they don't have Russia, they don't have the Gulf states. I mean, they can't live without Azerbaijan. So it's become even more sensitive now than it was in the past.
Absolutely. And of course, there is the BTS angle. No? the numbers vary. It's between 30 something to 49% or so that of Israel's oil that comes from the BTC, the Baku Tbilisi pipeline, which is a story that I followed from the beginning when Brzezinski went to Baku in 1995 to sell the idea to the Aliyev clan. That's a very, very long story. And at the time was already the same story. We need to bypass Russia and Iran. So why not build a pipeline that's going to cost almost $4 billion? So that's what it is. But the problem is Aliyev and Erdogan, they didn't do anything to cut off supplying Baku oil to Israel. It's part of their shady, dodgy deals, Erdogan and Aliyev. Aliyev is a pure gangster, and Erdogan is a hedger. He's always hedging. Very, very, very complicated alliance. And from an Iranian point of view, they have to they do pay enormous attention to everything that they do in minutia. They know that they cannot antagonize Turkey and vice versa. Erdogan cannot antagonize Iran. First of all, energy links as well, neighbors, and of course, Turkey still has in the back of Erdogan's mind maybe to be a key Eurasia player. For the moment, they are not. They are not part of important, and they have their own strategy, which is something that it's when I was in Istanbul, I went there, talked to them. They couldn't explain what they want. The famous what's the name of the thing? Sorry, Glenn, it escapes me now. The Foundation of Turkic States, Organization of Turkic States. I'm sorry, headquartered in Istanbul. Basically, it's a real estate scheme of Erdogan's friends to build to have a real estate contracts all across Central Asia. That's essentially it. So it's not power projection, and in geopolitical terms, when you put Turkey competing with China and Russia in Central Asia, it's a joke. They don't even register, right? But the ambition is there. And of course, the relationship between Turkey and Israel, which is still extremely shady. Our friend, Professor Morandi, in fact, he talks about it all the time. His position is aligned, I would say, with, let's say, the ruling classes in Tehran, including military analysts. You cannot trust anything about Erdogan. And he's always playing a double game. It's true. He plays a double game with everybody. But Azerbaijan is very complicated. If they would be dragged eventually, assuming this war goes on, if they are dragged to do something and allow, for instance, attacks against Iran coming from Azerbaijani territory, they're going to pay a huge price. Because this is what happened during the 12-day war, and Iran didn't do anything about it. And Iran had full evidence that drones were coming from Azerbaijani territory to attack Iran. If that happens again, Aliyev is going to be in deep, deep, deep trouble, to say the least. For the moment, it's a wait and see thing, because they consider themselves, well, this war has nothing to do with us, and in the end, depending on how it goes, they may even profit from it. But nothing is secure yet. But well, I got an invitation to go to one of these forums in Baku. I'm going to take it because I would love to have this place these questions to these people on the spot, assuming they don't throw me in jail.
No, well, it's just too many. I always make the point with this war on Iran. I think the reason why so many American presidents avoided this because there's so many uncertain, unknown, and uncontrollable variables. Like what's going to happen to Azerbaijan, if it gets pulled in. This is huge. This is going to change, part of it, not just the Eurasian but the European landscape. So it seems so reckless to have gone down this path. But I think for the Iranians, though, and this is the main miscalculation for the US, that Iran is not simply trying to get out of this war, get a ceasefire, so go back to normal. The idea that Iran, this is time to clean up, like after all these decades of sanctions, threats, attacks, proxy wars. It wants to settle some scores and do it on its own terms. So, yeah, this was an easy war to start, but it's going to be very, very difficult to finish because well, when it's over, the world will look very different, I think. So
Completely. And you see, Glenn, a part of their, I would say, most the categorical imperatives of their list of demands. No more sanctions, meaning no more sanctions period, which is absolutely impossible because these sanctions will have to be abolished by the US Congress. And we know this will never happen. Payment of reparations. This will never happen. Can you imagine the empire paying reparations to Iran? And for the Iranians, this is a matter of faith. It's part of their 3 or 4 top points alongside no more US military bases in West Asia. So the gulf, literally, metaphorically and otherwise, between both sides is unbridgeable. Unbridgeable. And there's nobody who could possibly mediate. The only possible mediator could be Russia. And this is something that what it was this, according to, if you look at what Ushakov did not say about the Trump to Putin phone call, of course, they touched upon the subject. And Putin might have said to Trump, yes, I can be the mediator. All the players over there, they respect us. The problem is, do the Iranians want mediation? And for the moment, this is what we hear day after day from the Iranian leadership, including Ayatollah Mustafa Khamenei. No ceasefire, no mediation. We're going all the way. And that's what makes it so volatile. No?
Yeah. Now, the only thing the US can do, it seems, is offer, a way out, a ceasefire, and to put pressure this direction, just escalate. But once they notice now that Iran can match their escalation, it's
Exactly.
I don't see where this is gonna go. It's again a foolish war to have begun to start off with. So, anyways, Pepe, it's always good to see you, and I hope to see you
Always a
again soon in
pleasure,
person
Glenn.
again.
Thank you.